Hari Om friends, welcome once again to my Sanatan Dunya channel, your spiritual home. In this video, I shall be giving my commentary upon verses 13 to 19 of the 13th chapter of the Bhagawad Geeta. For those of you who have not yet watched the commentaries on the previous verses of the Gita, I suggest you go ahead and watch these videos before proceeding further with this video. These videos are available in the playlist titled Bhagavad Geeta Commentary, all 18 chapters. Before I go ahead and give the commentary upon these verses of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Geeta, I have a small request to make. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, then I suggest you do so that you may be updated about forthcoming videos uploaded to this channel. So let's move on. The 13th to 16th slokas of the 13th chapter of the Gita are as follows. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. This is beginningless and it is subordinate to me. It is called Brahman, the spirit, and it lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his face, his eyes and faces, and he hears everything. In this way the Supersoul exists. The Supersoul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time he is the master of all modes of material nature. The Supreme Truth exists both internally and externally, in the moving and non-moving. He is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. The commentary of the mentioned 4 slokas is as follows. Here in these verses, Bhagavan is saying that he is going to explain about the nature of Brahman, or the spirit that pervades the whole creation. He says that knowing this, everything else shall be known and one shall reach the end of knowing. Firstly, Bhagavan is saying that this spirit of Brahman is eternal and without a beginning. Everything in creation is temporary and unreal. It keeps changing second after second. There is nothing in creation which is infinite and yet eternal. Only the infinite spirit of Brahman is eternal. It is this spirit which provides the basis of life in the whole creation. Another characteristic of this Brahman is that it is beyond cause and effect. Everything that we see around us is an effect of some or another cause. For example, a tree is an effect produced from a seed. A human child is an effect of the cause called father and mother. Rain is caused by the performance of sacrifice, and so on. However, Brahman or spirit is beyond cause and effect. It is uncaused and is also not an effect of anything else. It exists independent of the creation. This means that Brahman or spirit can exist without a creation, but the creation cannot exist without Brahman as its substratum. In the second of the above verses, Bhagavan is saying that the spirit of Brahman has eyes, faces, hands, legs, etc. everywhere. The spirit is the basis of life in the whole creation. All creatures which have faces, eyes, hands and legs are able to do so only because of the spirit within their bodies. Therefore, this is the figurative way of saying that all the eyes, faces, hands and legs of all the creatures belong to Brahman, meaning Brahman has so many eyes, hands, faces, etc. because Brahman is the basis of life in all the bodies. Next, Bhagavan is saying that the Supersoul is the source of all the senses and is yet without senses. The senses such as sight, sound, taste, touch and smell exist and perform their functions only because of Brahman or spirit which is providing life to them. So in this way, the Supersoul of Brahman is the source of the senses. Yet the supersoul is beyond the senses, as impressions collected by the senses are processed by the mind and in no way affect the consciousness or self or spirit. The supersoul is transcendental to the senses. The supersoul exists at a level higher than the senses, mind and intellect, although it is the source of the senses, mind and intellect. The supersoul exists as a witness to the activities of the senses, mind and intellect. The supersoul, which is the basis of life in all living entities, provides for the maintenance of those living entities. The supersoul, being an intelligent entity, provides the guidance to every living entity for their survival and upkeep. Although performing this important function, the supersoul remains a detached witness to this function and is no way affected by the joys, sorrows, success or failure of the living entities. For example, it is the jiva or limited living entity which feels hunger, thirst, pleasure, pain, etc. The spirit or self is not in the least affected by any of these sensations. The next point being mentioned by the Lord is that the self or spirit transcends the modes of nature, namely sattva or goodness, rajas or passion, and tamas or ignorance. The gunas have the self as their origin and are in a constant state of flux. Although the self is the source of the gunas, since the self exists at a higher level, it is not affected in any way by the interactions of the modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion and ignorance. For example, the residents living in the first floor of an apartment are not affected in any way by the activities being performed by the residents in the ground floor of the same apartment. This is because they are functioning at their own different levels. Similarly, although the self is the basis of the gunas, since the self exists in a dimension higher than the gunas, they are unaffected by the interactions of the gunas. The next point being mentioned is that the self exists internally and externally of all entities, both living and non-living, and animate and inanimate. The self is all-pervading and infinite, just like space. Just as there is no place where there is no space, similarly there is no part of creation where there is no self. Yet despite being everywhere, the self is not knowable by the senses, mind and intellect. Again, the same reason can be given here, which was given just now for the gunas. The self or spirit is the basis of the senses, mind and intellect, but since it exists at a higher level and since the senses, mind and intellect exist at a lower level, the self therefore cannot be known by these inferior entities, namely the senses, mind and intellect. One will have to go beyond these three faculties and remain in complete silence and stillness to experience the self. The last point being mentioned by Bhagavan regarding the supersoul is that although it is far, far away, yet it is also near. The self is far away from us in the sense that it cannot be known by the senses, mind and intellect. Since these faculties can never know the self, no matter how hard we try, the self is thus declared to be far away from us in terms of comprehension, apprehension or understanding. Its knowledge eludes our understanding and ability to know. However, although it is beyond our ability to know through the senses, mind and intellect, this spirit is very close to us as it is our own self. Hence, the self is far in terms of knowing and understanding, but close to us in terms of proximity. So close, in fact, that we are this supersoul. We only need to silence our minds completely during meditation in order to realize this self. Now I shall move on to verses 17 to 19. The 17th to 19th verses of the 13th chapter of the Gita are as follows. Although the supersoul appears to be divided, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge, he is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. The commentary of the mentioned 3 slokas is as follows. Here in these verses we find the Lord continuing with his discourse on the self or the supersoul. The Lord is saying that although the self appears to be divided, it is yet undivided. The best analogy that can be given here to understand this is that just as space exists everywhere and yet appears to be divided among the living entities but is not so in reality, similarly the supersoul is one homogeneous mass of consciousness which is infinite and omnipresent, and although it appears to be divided among many living and non-living entities, it is not so in reality. The space within my body is the same as the space within your body or anybody else's body. Also, the space within all our bodies is the same as the space outside our bodies. In other words, there exists only one space which is simultaneously within and without all the living and non-living entities. Similarly, the self that is in my body and your body and even the bodies of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva is the same. It is one homogeneous mass of consciousness which exists undivided among the divided. Infinity, when divided by any number, produces only infinity as its result. Similarly, although the self exists within every living entity, it does not undergo any reduction, division or change thereby. It continues to remain infinite. The next point being mentioned by the Lord is that this supersoul is the source of light in all the luminous objects. The earth and other planets get light from the sun. But where does the sun get light from? The answer is that the sun is self-effulgent. But the truth is that the whole of creation, comprising of billions of suns, planets, stars, galaxies, etc., get their luminosity and light from the one self alone. Therefore, the self is the source of not just light for the luminaries, but for life and power of anything and everything in the creation. In fact, the self is not just the source of light, but is also beyond the darkness of matter. Darkness is just the absence of light, and the self being the light of all lights, it is so subtle that it is beyond darkness or tamas. As we have already seen, the self is beyond the 3 gunas, namely sattva, rajas and tamas. Since sattva represents luminosity and tamas represents darkness, and since the self is beyond the 3 gunas, it is therefore beyond luminosity or sattva and tamas or darkness. Further, Bhagavan is saying that the self is knowledge, object and goal of knowledge. In order to attain freedom from sorrow and the repetitive cycle of birth and death, one needs to have knowledge of the self. But the self is not an object of knowledge like a stone or cloth which can be seen, touched, etc. Since it is beyond the reach of the mind and the senses and even the intellect, the self therefore is to be known only by silence and stillness. Here Bhagavan adds that this self is situated in the heart of all living entities. We are the self. We have knowledge of thousands of things, but unfortunately we do not know ourselves. Once we can know the self that we are, we shall attain freedom from sorrow, freedom from the cycle of birth and death, and attain eternal peace and happiness. Finally, the Lord is saying that He has thus far summarily described the field of activities of body and knower of this field, namely the self. Bhagavan is also saying that only His devotees can understand this science thoroughly and attain to His nature. What the Lord means to say is that those who are not devoted to God, truth and spiritual knowledge cannot attain this freedom, as their minds are conditioned by other superficial matters. In order to attain self-knowledge, one needs to cultivate devotion towards the Lord and take up the study of scriptures sincerely, so that by repeated study, reflection, devotion and love, one can get to know the truth that one already is and that God is too. So friends, here ends the commentary on the 13th to 19th verses of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Geeta. Stay tuned for more commentaries on the following verses of the Gita, and keep checking this channel for updates to this playlist titled Bhagavad Geeta Commentary all 18 chapters, and also do watch the other videos available in this channel so that you can enhance your knowledge of the eternal religion or Sanatan Dharma. And in case you have not already subscribed to my channel, then I suggest you do so that you may be updated about forthcoming videos uploaded to this channel. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great time ahead. Hari Om.